For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And so that familiar scripture from the beginning of Isaiah chapter 9 goes on. A scripture that we're drawn back to, it seems, every Christmas, because it describes Jesus so well. And as we continue this morning to unpack some of the words that we use at Christmas time, last week we focused on peace. This week we focus on Wonderful Counselor. Some texts translate from that as Wonderful Counselor. That is, two traits of the child to be born, wonderful and counsellor. Other translations use wonderful as an adjective to describe the counsellor. Not going to go into that this morning, not going to try and unpack all that and come to a theological position on whether it should be wonderful and counsellor or wonderful counsellor. I'm going to go with wonderful counsellor. And maybe another time we'll dig into that. That's going to be a rabbit hole. But if this actually section of a whole of Isaiah's prophecy is fascinating. And you need to take the time to read the preceding chapters to get an insight into the magnitude and impact of the prophet's message. In his lifetime, Isaiah had seen the kingdoms of Israel and Judah desolated by all of God's people being taken into exile due to disobedience. In his mind's eye, Isaiah may well have seen something like what you see on the screen. But he's interpreted it not as a physical desert, as we might think of Central Australia or the Sahara, but rather what's happening to God's people. They've been taken out of the land. Their way of life is turned upside down. Their communities and the community connections have been destroyed. They're forced to live in foreign lands with foreign rulers and foreign rules. What's more, the long-held story of a land flowing with milk and honey that's been passed down through the generations now seems an impossibility. And no doubt they're asking, where is God? Where is God in all of this? And so we turn to chapter 11. And as the man of God reflects on the history of his nation and peoples, he hasn't lost hope. The people might have lost hope, but Isaiah hasn't lost hope. He doesn't feel abandoned. In actual fact, quite the opposite. He sees a shoot coming up from the barren landscape. As he looks out across that, as he visualises that in his mind's eye, he sees a shoot coming up from the barren landscape. Out of what seemed to be lifeless and without hope, the prophet sees regrowth. Coming not from a new political sphere, not from a new civilization or empire taking over, not from some people power uprising, but from the root of Jesse. And if you follow the genealogy in Luke backwards, from Jesse, all the way back, keep going, all the way back through the generations, you end up where? At Adam. The first created, the Son of God. So the prophet's words that we read last week at the end of chapter 9, verse 7, the zeal of the Lord will achieve this, Isaiah already sees as being fulfilled, even though what he sees is actually a barren landscape. You see, the thing about Isaiah is he wasn't convinced by what he saw with his eyes. He was convinced by what he knew about God. It's a big difference. He wasn't convinced by what he saw with his eyes. He was convinced by what he knew about God. So recorded in verse 1 of our reading for this morning is, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From the roots a branch will bear fruit. Didn't matter how desolate it got. It didn't matter how bad it looked. Isaiah could see something better coming. And he knew that it would come from something that God had done down through history and down through the ages. I remember hearing a story when I was first involved in agriculture, and as is common practice at sowing time, farmers will go around and sow their wheat, and there'll be a few old stumps in the paddock or a few roots or something and a few sticks, and they'll pile them up and they'll light a fire, and it's the middle of May or June, and they'll burn the stump, and that's good because next year they'll be able to farm over that bit of land and it won't break their machinery. And the story goes that one of the farmers was doing that, and the fire went down into the root of the stump, and in about the middle of November, when it was hot and dry, it burst out and burnt the wheat crop. There was something going on in the stump, under the ground, unseen to the human eye. And Isaiah knew that God would be up to something, and out of that would come a shoot from the root of Jesse. So as we focus today on Wonderful Counselor, I better get back on the topic. Counselling is actually a fairly common focus within our culture today. But let's not kid ourselves, nothing new about that. I imagine it's been a common practice throughout all of history in developed cultures. And if you read back, even in biblical times, kings had advisors, they had counsellors. Some good, some not so good. But when we hear the word counsellor, I imagine a whole lot of images come to mind. And what comes to your mind? One definition I found goes like this. This is a marriage counsellor. A person who helps you work through your marital issues, but can't do anything about your partner's inability to load the dishwasher correctly. Another definition I found was the superhero your sanity never knew it needed, because buffering isn't just for videos. There's a bit of truth in this one. They pause the chaos, this is the counsellor, pauses the chaos, clears the cache and reboots your mind's operating system. Side effects include self-awareness and a lighter outlook on existence. Maybe you'd like this one. Counsellor is a person who's not in it for the income, but in it for the outcome. On a more serious note, it might be someone who helps people navigate the challenges they face, change their lives and equip them with the tools they need to move forward. And then you think, what are the qualities of a counsellor? Well, there's a list as long as your arm. It might be described as someone who is empathetic, patient, self-aware, open-minded, flexible, compassionate, a good listener, and so the list goes on and on. As you read Isaiah, as you think about the promised child, as you think about Jesus, the baby, and then the grown man and the one that we follow, what are the characteristics, what are the traits that come to your mind of a wonderful counsellor? I have no doubt that Isaiah very deliberately used the word yaetz to describe Jesus. Yaatz being the Hebrew word meaning to advise, to deliberate, to resolve. And Isaiah goes on in this passage to lay out two things. What the characteristics of this wonderful counsellor that he sees would be, and then the final outcome for God's people. So firstly, let's look at what those characteristics might be. The first one is one on whom the Spirit will rest. Not just alights, like a bird on a branch, for a temporary rest, for a temporary time, but a place where it settles. Not some of the time, but all of the time. Not in part measure, but in full measure. Permanent and enduring. Think of, in the Old Testament times, the Spirit was given for specific purposes to specific people at specific times. There was not the option for the Spirit to reside with man because man was sinful and sin had not yet been dealt with. And so for Isaiah to say, this is about the Spirit of God will rest on this person. This will be the dwelling place of the Spirit of God. They were like, don't understand that. It's beyond what they experienced every day. But Jesus doesn't have good and bad spiritual days like we might have bad headache. Well, I never have a bad headache because it's none to be bad about. But you know what people, they go, oh, I'm just having a bad headache. Well, Jesus never went around and went, oh, yeah, sorry, Lord, I didn't get that right. I was having a bad spiritual day that day. No, the Spirit of God rests permanently on Jesus. Isaiah sees more than that though. He sees the spirit of wisdom and understanding. Isaiah foresaw in Jesus the ability not to be swayed by words people use, but rather know and understand the heart of every single person who has, is, and will live. You might recall the account of Jesus healing the paralytic man in Matthew chapter 9. And Matthew records these words, the scribes said within themselves, this man blasphemes. And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, why do you think evil in your hearts? I smile every time I read that particular account because it reminds me of a time when we were at school. About year 9, maths teacher could throw a piece of chalk with pinpoint accuracy. And so you'd be sitting in your class, dreaming of something, doing something different, thinking about something other than maths, and a piece of chalk would lob right on your desk in front of you. And I remember one day, and I'm not going to claim it was me, but I can't claim it wasn't either. Piece of chalk landed right in front, and this person said, what, sir? I wasn't even talking. And the teacher's reply was, no, but you were about to. And I could see the scribes in that encounter with Jesus. He's just said to this paralysed man, take up your mat and walk. And then he turns around to them and says, why are you thinking evil? And they would have gone, we didn't say anything. And he'd go, no, but I knew what you were thinking. The spirit of wisdom and understanding. More than that, Isaiah goes on. Spirit of counsel and might. Isaiah looked forward to Jesus having an instant power to plan and develop something completely new or original, and to act and carry it through. Not just power, but a correct perspective that drives an action through to completion. Cast your mind to the encounter that Jesus had with two demon-possessed men living amongst the tombs in Matthew chapter 8. read what you like into that particular section of Scripture, but Jesus' action was powerful, swift, original, and complete. The demon said to Jesus, "What have you got to do with me? Send me to that herd of swine." And Jesus said, "So be it." And they all rushed down the mountainside, over the cliff, into the sea, and were drowned. Swift, powerful, original, and complete. With the swine keepers and the whole village impacted. Some of them would have loved it, others of them, no doubt, hated it. The spirit of counsel and might. Then Isaiah also sees the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. The prophet saw Jesus being so close to the Father that he was well acquainted with the true will of God, combined with the determination to carry it out to the fullest. We had a lady in our home group in Forbes, and she used to say, when God asks you to do something, he wants you to do it immediately, without question, and to the fullest. So it became a bit of a catch cry of the group. Immediately, without doubt, without question, and to the fullest. Listen to Jesus' words in the Garden of Gethsemane just prior to his arrest. "If you are willing," he said, "take this cup from me, yet not my will, but your will be done." This would have been, no doubt, one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult day humanly for Jesus in the whole of his earthly life. And yet he says emphatically, "Your will be done." I don't imagine that Jesus said, "Father, look, this is a bit tough. If there's some other way, do it, but if not, it'll be okay." And God said, "No, it's got to be that way, son." He goes, "Okay, I'll trust you." I think it was more like, "I don't want to do this, but if there's no other way, I stand by who you are and what you say, and your will be done." Jesus was emphatic about doing the Father's will. And so we have, as a result of this unique combination of the Spirit, the counsel, determination, and the fear of the Lord, and it's all spelled out in the next 3 verses, in verse 3, 4 and 5. And I'm not going to go through that in detail. It includes righteous judgment and justice for all peoples, not just the lower class, the poor or the needy. That was the order of the day. That was what those people lived, the culture they lived in. It was the poor people, it was the needy people who bore the brunt of justice. And Isaiah says, no more. It won't be that way. It will be done with righteousness and justice. And just as Isaiah didn't focus on the things of the day, but rather what he knew about God, so too did Jesus. This wasn't about the easy road or the road that was his choice. It was about the road for the sake of the Father and his kingdom. The right road, Jesus would have called it. And so it follows logically then that Isaiah would paint another picture in verses 6 to 10. Isaiah looks forward to peace. Peace where the lamb lies down with the lion. As a matter of fact, in those next few verses, a place where the whole range of animals that were once enemies would now be at peace, and children would be unafraid and unharmed by animals much bigger than themselves. To a point where they would actually lead them. They would actually have control of these animals. And that blows our mind, even today, that there might be little children down at Taronga Zoo and you pop them in the cage with the Death Adder. Or you leave them in the lion's den. That's okay, they'll be right there. Isaiah sees something that's far so removed from people's experience that they struggle to understand. And so he uses words and imagery that they might be able to grasp. And what he's talking about is the smallest of people would have dominion over the biggest of animals. And so Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 28 would be fulfilled. He's talking about something that's foreign to those people. He's talking about something that's foreign to us today. But if you're following Isaiah's drift here, these 4 verses are exactly the opposite of the desolation that he foresaw in those earlier chapters. Here's the fruit from the root of Jesse. Where once there was hostility, ill will, hatred, antagonism, disruption and the breaking down, enmity it's called, now there's peace, calm and a building up. Not just in the Holy Land, but all over the earth. Every square inch of it. So if you followed this morning through, you might be comparing Jesus as a counsellor with your best definition or the best counsellor you've ever seen. Which would you prefer? And yet there's another aspect or a couple of aspects I haven't touched on. How many times can you think back to before we had Google Maps and you asked for directions and you get something like, yeah, I think I know where that place is. You go down this road about, it's only a couple of blocks. So go down here 2 blocks or 3 blocks, it might be 5. And then you turn right and you go down there a bit and you go through the first roundabout and I think it's the second one, no, it might be the third one. And yeah, but anyway, down there a bit and then you turn left and you follow that for 3 or 4k, maybe, no, 2, it might be 5. And it's on the right, can't miss it. And so you get in your car and you're like, did he say go that way or that way? Or was it 3 blocks or 5 blocks? It's like, I think I'm more confused at the end than I was at the start. And yet, Jesus says 2 more things that your counsellor is never going to say to you. The first one he says is, deny yourself. You see, the reason we love our counsellors is because it's all about us. Jesus says, this is going to be a bit difficult. And it's not all about you. It's actually about God's kingdom. It's probably the hardest message for the church of the 21st century. This is not about us, it's about God's kingdom. But you're in good company because it was probably the hardest message for the church of the 20th century and the 19th and the 18th and the 17th and all the way back to, Cain and Abel. First thing Jesus says is, it's all about the kingdom. Second thing he says is, follow me. You don't have to remember all those directions and get the right roundabout to turn left and turn right or turn here or go there or so many blocks. Jesus says, come on, come with me. Because the reality is that in that place of peace that we call heaven, Jesus is already there. He's here and he's there. And he doesn't, not like an earthly counsellor who says, well, you've got to do this and you've got to do that and you've got to do that and you've got to do that, off you go. Jesus says, come with me and I will take you there. Yes, it'll be tough. Don't deny yourself, take up your cross, come with me, and I will take you there. Do you want the wonderful Counselor, or don't you? The message of Isaiah is really simple. As we look at what he might say if he were here today, seeing what he can see post Jesus' birth, post his death, post his resurrection, I have no doubt Isaiah would say something like, here's the wonderful Counselor. Will you deny yourself and follow him? Let me pray.